Today we will be in Chapter 1, Section 10, Properties of the Real Number System. Our two topic objectives for today are to identify additive and multiplicative inverses and to apply the associative, commutative, and distributive properties for multiplication and addition. Chapter 1, Section 10 is Properties of the Real Number System. So the first property we're going to talk about is the commutative property. We have the commutative property of addition, and this says if A and B represent any real numbers, then A plus B equals B plus A. An example of this is 3 plus 2 equals 2 plus 3. On the left side, 3 plus 2 is 5. On the right side, 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 equals 5. We also have the commutative property of multiplication. This says if A and B represent any real numbers, then A times B equals B times A. So an example of this is 4 times 5 is the same thing as 5 times 4. 4 times 5 is 20, and 5 times 4 is 20. 20 equals 20. Commutative commute changes the order of things. So if you think about commuting, so commutative changes the order of things. That's it. It just flip-flops the order. But there is a special note here that the commutative property does not hold for subtraction and division. If we did 3 minus 2, that would give us 1, but 2 minus 3 would give us a negative 1. Those are not the same thing, thus the property does not hold. The same thing is true for division. If we have 4 divided by 5, that is not the same thing as 5 divided by 4. So commutative property only works for addition and multiplication. Another property that we have is the associative property. We have the associative property of addition. This says if A, B, and C represent 3 real numbers, then A plus B, inside parentheses, plus C equals A plus, in parentheses, B plus C. An example of this is shown. We have the 2 plus 4 inside the parentheses with the plus 5 outside. And we're saying that that equals the same thing as 2 plus, then the parentheses, 4 plus 5. So let's see how this works out. On the left-hand side, if we do order of operations first, we have to do the parentheses. So we have to take the 2 plus 4, which will give us 6. Then we have the plus 5, and that'll give us 11. On the right-hand side, we have to do the parentheses first. So 4 plus 5 is 9. Then we add our 2, and that equals 11. So we get 11 on both sides, and that shows you that the associative property of addition works. There's also, that's supposed to say associative property of multiplication. That is a typo on my thing. Sorry about that. If A, B, and C represent 3 real numbers, then in parentheses, A times B times C on the outside is the same thing as A times, and then parentheses, B times C. An example of this is shown. In the parentheses on the left, we have 3 times 5, and then outside times 2, and we're saying that that is the same thing as taking 3 times, parentheses, 5 times 2. So let's work this out. Again, we're just doing order of operations, so we have to do parentheses first on the left. So that means we're taking 3 times 5, which is 15. Then we're multiplying that by 2, which will give us 30 on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, again, we have to do order of operations. So we're doing parentheses first, 5 times 2, which will give us 10. Then we're taking 3 times 10, which will give us 30. On both sides, we are getting 30. That means the associative property of multiplication works. Associative changes the grouping. That's all we did on these problems. We just moved kind of where our sets of parentheses were. So associate, we are associating different numbers together. Again, note that the associative property does not hold for subtraction and division. If we did 2, like up on the first example, if we did 2 minus 4 and then minus 5, and we're going to say that equals 2 minus and then in parentheses 4 minus 5. If we do the left side first, we do the parentheses, that'll give us negative 2 minus 5, which will give us negative 7. And then if we do the parentheses on the right hand side, that'll give us a 2 minus and then a negative 1, which will give us a positive 3. Negative 7 does not equal positive 3. So that's just an example to show you that the subtraction did not work in that case. We could do the exact same thing for division and show you that it doesn't work. So associative property only works for addition and multiplication. Next we have distributive property. If A, B, and C represent 3 real numbers, then A and then parentheses B plus C is the same thing as AB plus AC. What we did there was we distributed in that A. We took A times the B and we took A times the C. So if we're looking at the example below, we have 2 times, and then we have 3 plus 4. So that means we have 2 times 3 plus 2 times 4. If we're doing the left-hand side of that, we would be doing the parentheses first. So we take 3 plus 4, which will give us 7, and that'll give us 14. And then if we're doing the right-hand side, we take 2 times 3, which will give us 6, and then 2 times 4, which will give us 8. 6 plus 8 equals 14. When you're only dealing with numbers, it might not make sense to use the distributive property, but here shortly we're going to have a lot of we're going to have a lot of variables, and so the distributive property is going to come into play a lot. The distributive involves 2 operations, usually multiplication and division. Next we have the identity properties. If A represents any real number, then A plus 0 equals A, and 0 plus A equals A. That's the identity property of addition. Identity means that you can take 0 plus anything and you're going to get that anything back out. It doesn't change the identity of your A. It stays the same. See, here's 4 plus 0, and that equals 4. And 0 plus 4 also equals 4. The identity property of multiplication is A times 1 equals A, and 1 times A equals A. Remember, identity property means you're not changing the identity of the number you're working with. Your number wants to stay the same. So when you're doing addition, it's going to be 0. When you're doing multiplication, it's going to be 1. Again, here's an example. 13 times 1 equals 13, and 1 times 13 equals 13. In both cases, your 13 did not change because of your identity. Next, we are going to look at inverse properties. If A represents any real number, then A plus a negative A equals 0, and negative A plus A equals 0. This is the inverse property of addition. Inverses are basically what can you add to a number to get it to be 0. That is what you're looking for in your inverse property of addition. So if you're asked to find the inverse or opposite of a number like 3, you need to think in your mind, what do I need to add to 3 to get me to 0? And the answer to that is negative 3. Here's an example, 7. So we have 7 plus negative 7 equals 0. And then on the right-hand side, we have negative 7 plus 7 equals 0. We also have an inverse property for multiplication, and it's A times 1 over A equals 1. and 1 over a times a equals a. And that's also a typo. That's supposed to be 1 over here on the right. Sorry. And that's when a doesn't equal 0. And we have to make that distinction because we cannot divide by 0. We learned that in the previous section. So we can't divide by 0. So here's an example. If we take 12 times 1 over 12, that's going to give us 1. Because if we put that 12 over 1, then we can cancel our 12s, which leaves us 1 over 1, which reduces down to 1. The same thing is true on the right. So this is the inverse property of addition and the inverse property of multiplication. Now let's open up your homework for section 10, and I'm going to work 2 problems with you. I'm going to work problem number 3 and problem number 9. So problem number 3 says complete the equation to the right of the equal sign to illustrate the associative property of addition. The associative property is dealing with associating. So this is just changing the groupings, remember? So we have in parentheses c plus a and outside the parentheses plus 4. So over here it just wants us to show the associative property of addition. And that just means we're changing our grouping. So we're moving our parentheses around. So that means our c is going to be outside of our parentheses. And we're going to put our parentheses a plus 4 and then close our parentheses. If you look back in your notes, does this look like the example of the associative property of addition that we did? Yes, let's hit enter. We did it correct. So a lot of your homework is going to be similar to this, where it gives you part of it and then it wants you to complete it on the right hand side to show that you understand what that property is asking. Let's do number 9. For the given expression, determine A, the additive inverse, and then B, the multiplicative inverse. So the number that it gives us is 6. The additive inverse of 6 is, when you're thinking of additive inverse, what do you add to 6 to get you to 0? The answer is -6. So let's hit that, and that's good. The multiplicative inverse of 6 is what? So in this case, we're thinking, what do we multiply 6 by to get us to the number 1? Remember, a times 1 over a equals 1. So if our a is 6, then we have 6 times, and it needs to be 1 over 6 to get us to be that 1. Hit enter, and we got it correct. If you want more practice with this, remember this button down here called Similar Exercise. All you have to do is click that, and it'll give you a whole new problem, a whole new number that you can work with. So good luck on your homework, and good luck on your quizzes.